Alrighty, good morning.
Morning.
We're shooting this a little bit earlier than usual, so we shall see how how this one turns out. And we got a fun topic. I was thinking on the weekend we saw some pretty big things in the world, and Patrick has no idea where we ever go with these, so it's always a surprise. So I always enjoy watching his face as he's trying to figure out where it is that I'm going to go, and then I'm going to give him a question. Middle East. Some really intriguing things there. And I don't want to get into too much because I don't understand that much. You don't understand that much. Most of us listening don't understand that much because we have not grown up there. We're not living it. But it seems like maybe something significant happened, or what's your sense on it?
Wow. I did not expect you to go.
No, I know.
Worldwide.
This is half my fun with this podcast, is watching you
events.
Scramble to try to...
So I guess what we're talking about is the
Israel,
peace,
Hamas.
the peace deal that was reached.
I don't know if peace is the right word. I know that's what they use, but more of a...
we're going to stop shooting each other
for a bit.
Yeah.
Hostages were returned. I think all the living ones were. I don't know if they have all the remains, but all the living ones were returned. I know that.
Yeah. I actually think...
Sorry, buddy.
I actually think in many ways in this there was a moment where Trump was walking to the presidential helicopter, whatever that thing is called, and he stopped for a second, and somebody had asked him something, and he said something very vulgar about the situation between Hamas and Israel, and he basically said they don't know what they're doing. Like, they are so wrapped up in the back and forth that like it's completely past sane thinking of any sort. Like, it's like survival mode, fear mode, hate mode, endlessly.
Right.
And I don't know. I think it's a good thing when people stop shooting each other. And I think it's a good thing when people have food to eat. And I think it's a good thing when people have a roof over their head. And I think it's a good thing when people aren't being used as human shields. And I think it's a good thing when, when a region that has only known a lot of pain.
Yeah. So much pain.
Some of that pain stops for a little bit. Like, I think of that one, the commercial that CBC airs every Christmas where they stop the war on Christmas Eve.
Yep.
And for a moment, someone stands up and humanity, like actual, like, I can look at you as my brother, returns.
Yep.
Like, instead of you're German, I'm American, and well, because of that, we're going to shoot each other. Instead of that, we're just two humans.
Right.
Just were born in two different countries, and we really didn't have hatred towards each other outside of what we were told to have.
Right.
And I think, for a moment that's nice.
Right. So
wow, that's a very you started out like
Let's
deep.
Go. Donald, hey, if you're giving up your time to listen to us, we may as well talk about things that matter. So here's my thought and kind of where I'm leading into some of this. So the topic this morning that we want to kind of address is, why has unforgiveness become so accepted in North American Christianity? And part of what has got my brain racing about it is, like, we don't know what to do with even the concept of peace. Like, if somebody were to say, hey, there's peace in the Middle East, we would all go, yeah, but until when? And we're just so used to a world that's so jaded and so broken. I think when the words of Jesus come through and talk about forgiveness and reconciliation and this ideal that we're supposed to strive towards, people don't even know how to respond. Like, that's not even possible. Like, I don't even know what that would feel like. And I think there's a part of me that kind of goes, I'm so used to just seeing the violence that I don't even think this is possible. Like, when I look at that deal, my jaded sense comes in and I'm like, how long? And so then you start going, okay, but let's back up the train just a little bit and go, okay, well, I thought God was all powerful. I thought the power of the cross was supposed to actually have power. What has happened to us that we no longer believe in that? And so that's kind of where the brain has gotten thinking. And so let me switch out of this for a little bit. And I don't know if this is all going to work. And maybe this podcast will suck, but here's where my brain's going. When you walk into a church in North America, And maybe you can remember what it was like when you first walked in. What are the things that you felt pressured to become? And was forgiving your enemies one of them? Let me give you a few minutes to think, because I'll give you kind of my thoughts.
Well,
so when you walk into a gym, when you walk into, any sort of club or something, there's certain expectations. And one of the things that I'm just kind of, and I'm not really sure, I grew up in the church, so I don't really know, but when I look at some of this stuff and I go, there's certain things that I think I understood were expectations of a Christian. But there were some that I think are abnormal. To forgive your enemy at this point would be an abnormal act of Christianity.
Yeah, which is kind of wild. I don't know. My first experience walking into a church, I don't think I felt pressure to be a certain way, but there definitely was a very understood culture of appearance, how the church service worked, the expectation of you would get the vibe of what it meant to be a good Christian, and
what would that mean to you? Because this will be a tough conversation, because I don't really know how to answer this. But what does that mean to you when you say, "Well, we got to push"? And I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus.
No, and
this is me processing. Going, when somebody walks into the church and they're not a Christian, what are the things that they're expecting as normal? Because we say that, be a good Christian. What does that mean? What specifically did you feel like, to be a good Christian, I needed to 1, 2, 3?
I would say look good and be pure in front of people. You want 3?
Well, no, because when I go back, so my
church,
my closest thing would be being at youth growing up. And so again, where my brain went, and I can't speak for all of our youth leaders as to where they wanted our brains to go.
Yeah.
But the behavior was always more about the lack of sin. But sin wasn't defined in any, I would never have, if I would have told my leader that I was having, I was looking at inappropriate images online.
Right.
It would have been responded to significantly different than if I would have said, I'm struggling to forgive my friend.
Right.
Right. And so I'm using that. I know they're pretty broad examples, but I think there is a piece where the more I look into this whole idea of tough conversations stuff, the more I'm so much of it is rooted in we've just accepted hatred. You look at the after effect of 9/11. You look at the after effect of immigration. You look, even our Mennonite culture, what the Mennonites felt about the Mexicans when they were growing up. Those two, there's a pile of racism there. Some of it was from, their growing up and what they learned and what they experienced and what they saw. But the way we respond to so much of this, and you just kind of go, why has this become normalized? You can slam, don't gossip, don't this, don't that. But as long as we allow this, and as long as it's kind of normal, I don't know, people hurt me. And it's tough to forgive, so I'm choosing not to.
Well, there's a lot to the question. I keep coming back to...
So much. I know.
I keep coming back to, I think we've allowed a lot of idols into church and into our faith experience. And I think by that, I mean ideals that are not Jesus.
Why?
Because I think it's easier to look the part than be the part.
But why do that? Why go to the gym or join a rep hockey team and settle with looking the part?
It's because you're calling people to a standard that they can't do themselves. And that causes them to, or reveals to them that their standing that they want to show other people isn't really who they are. And I don't want to look bad. So don't call me to a standard that's going to make me look bad. I want I want to be able to fit into the image of God that I think I'm supposed to look at. And then when people see me, they think that's a good person, that's a good Christian. But when you call me to a standard that actually requires me to sacrifice the vengeance that I think I'm supposed to be able to have towards somebody who's done me wrong, or the position I think I'm supposed to have because I think I'm better than someone who's done things that are wrong and I haven't. I think a lot of that plays into it. I think when you call somebody to a standard that says you have to forgive that person who did you wrong, or you are that person, you know, it's a high standard because I think it levels people's pride.
Okay,
and I think that right there, people reject because I'm better than that person who did wrong to me because I haven't done that wrong to somebody else. And I totally get it. No judgment over whatever people have had happen to them in their life.
100%.
I not at all. No judgment. Because, wow. But we're called to forgive because Jesus knows it'll make us free. So, not that person. So he knows.
Let me push back a little bit just for fun.
Fantastic.
I know you're having fun.
Where are we going?
Why do you feel the disclaimer of no judgment?
Because we judge very quickly in our circles.
If one of your friends was hurt and they chose alcohol as a coping mechanism instead of bitterness, we would intervene when it comes to alcohol. Why don't we intervene when it comes to bitterness? And I know what you're saying because I would say the same thing because I don't want to make victims that are listening to this feel like garbage. And I don't want to make victims.
That's not the point.
So I get
and
that
part of that may be the woven in fact of our culture of how much we have accepted things that are just, it's okay. I mean,
just look at the damage it does mentally to people. Bitterness is a poison. It literally destroys people.
Oh, and the anxiety that's wrapped into that bitterness. And
so why do we feel the need? Because both of us are sitting here a little bit on our tiptoes going, I hope we don't offend somebody, but you're like, that's going to destroy you. And Jesus was very clear. There's a lot of things we're black and white on that Jesus was not. When it comes to forgiveness, like it was black and white. Like, no, you're going to forgive.
Leave your money at the altar, go and forgive, and then come back, and then I'll accept your...
The parable of the unforgiving servant, right?
Yeah.
He's like, look, I forgave so much, and then you turn around and you want to hold bitterness.
Yeah.
And I in a lot of this, again, when people hear this, if you don't know us, I think you could easily hear this the wrong way. But for us, this is our own journey. I've struggled with forgiveness. I've struggled with bitterness, right? Like we live in a world that is filled with this stuff. So it's not like I'm like, man, how do we get our church? But I want to wrestle through some of this and go, why in our families, why in our own lives, in our workplaces, in our churches, we fight so much against sexual sin. That was the biggest one from youth. It was sexual sin. Yeah, it was a big thing, right? And as you become an adult, there's other pressures, but the pressure to forgive isn't there. But then you know what? The other thing that I wonder is one of the side effects of this also the fact that there's so much depression because people can't accept God's forgiveness. You know when Jesus talks about like if you don't forgive others, God won't forgive you. I think there's a third part of that where I don't think you can experience God's forgiveness in the way God intended it to, so long as you're holding bitterness over others. Because you can't experience what you refuse to give. Like it doesn't make sense. If I fully grasp grace, I will give grace. No different than you can't really love beyond what you've been loved. Like you can try, but until you've experienced it, until you've experienced unconditional love of a God who knows everything, you can never give that to someone because you wouldn't even understand what that would be. So let me go back to one thing I was thinking as you talk, because this is something you bring up a lot. So you felt, and again, this is 8:30 in the morning, so very personal. Sorry.
It's awesome.
You feel very much a pressure to look a certain part when it comes to Christianity. And for me, that has never really been there. So then every time I hear it, I kind of grasp, but then now as you were saying it again, you brought it up a couple times, I'm like, I'd like to dive into that a little bit. And how have you broken free and what parts of that do you still feel? Because I do know if you come from any of the very conservative or I don't want to say extreme, but some of the ones where like how you dress and stuff was such a big deal. Certainly my parents, where they were to come from the Mexican old colony or some of that kind of stuff, the pressure to come out of and not feel that pressure of looking a certain way and playing a certain part. Like, what does that transition look like to you? And do you still feel those lingering effects?
Man, I think I feel the pressure to look a certain way because it's not just about like going to church, but it's been connected to a different part of my journey of always being the chubby fat kid. Mm-hmm. And then when you can look a certain way and people right away accept you, oh, look at that. He's put on, our team, he's wearing the jersey, that type of thing. So he's on our team, that type of thing. I remember.
So you would have had this, just because I think it's more for me I want to pull some stuff out of this. You would have felt some of that coming into this? Because I think my assumption always was, and this is why I felt you starting there was so odd to me, because I'm like, I would have always assumed, because I kind of know the church where you started, and I kind of would have been like, oh, well, you never had any of that before, and then you got there, and then you felt this pressure. But some of this was already the journey that, life and it had taken you before you got there. Yeah,
to look a certain way. I mean, I think that's built into our culture.
Sure it is. But for you, a little bit more broadly.
Well, I mean, you walk into a very conservative environment and they all have a very specific way of adorning themselves on a Sunday and how they dress. And when you walk in and you first get there, you're not in the, you don't look the certain way. So then when you come back the next time and you look the part, there's a lot of excitement that you've figured it out. You know what I mean? Like, hey, look, you look great, da da da. And it might have not have been like, hey, we're glad you're wearing the team's jersey. It might have been just like, wow, you look good. But the way it's interpreted is vastly different necessarily than the way it was imposed. Although if you were going to, like, I remember being on a missions exposure type thing where we were running weekly Bible camps in different neighborhoods around communities in Hamilton. And we were on a bus heading somewhere, and I had one of the main leaders walk up to me and say, hey, at the time I was wearing like a chain. I had like some sort of necklace on. I think it was like a leather one. Back in the day, that was cool. Those kind of leather.
It wasn't like a choker thing, though, was it?
No, not a choker, but I appreciate that. And he's like, hey, your necklace is causing some difficulties. Some of the other teens are noticing that, and they don't think. And it was like, oh, okay. And I just took it off. I really didn't care. I thought it a little bit odd that's where the focus was. Right. As you're going, door to door, and you're telling people about Jesus, and kids are, coming and listening, and you have teenagers that are, asking Christ into their heart. The concern was a chain around my neck. So that's kind of like the backdrop for it. Like I remember being told this story by a missionary couple to the jungles of Suriname, South America. And what they said is they regretted putting clothes on the natives. They regretted it. It was a mistake. The awkwardness of being around naked people should have been left, because the natives thought they were born again as soon as they put clothes on. And it created a barrier between the witness of what they wanted to, the change, the actual, rebirth of these people, because they thought they had the white man's God, so to speak, when they put on the white man's clothes.
Oh, that's crazy.
And I think, that story better illustrates the barriers that, that was some of the problematic stuff that came with that.
Why do you think so many? Because it's not unique to just the church you came from. I mean, this is even in modern churches that are non-denominational or whatever. You can get some of those. If you were truly Christian, you would blank.
Yeah.
What drives us to that? Why is that such a natural predisposition to put on people?
I think some of that is because it's easier to see like a marker than it is to get to know the man. And I think if you're actually going to sit down with somebody and have a conversation with them and hear their heart and sense God on them, sense the Spirit in them, it's harder. And I think it takes time and it requires you to set aside notions so that you can actually listen to somebody and be like, you know, and then ask that question and like, you know, are you a follower of Jesus? Are you you know what I mean? Like,
do you still find yourself struggling with some of that here?
Here?
What's some of the lingering effects from some of that? Or do you feel like you've kind of broken free of that? Or
I don't know if I've ever broken free of my image issues. I think I have more freedom than I've ever had. But I think some of those things have flipped from I need to wear the jersey to I have a responsibility to reflect the light of Jesus in a right way.
Yeah.
And I think those are two different things. I don't think they're the same. I think you can dress the part and act the part and do all those things, but I think there's a difference when you're like, I'm representing, which is a wild, like when you slow down and you think about it, you're representing the God of the universe,
right?
The maker of everything.
Yeah.
You know, who am I to think that, you know, if it was a gray shirt or a blue shirt would really make a difference? And, you know,
God's like, I was going to move and then you showed up wearing that.
Yeah. But like, I think there is aspects to it because, again, it's not about, I don't necessarily think it's about God through us. Like, it's not, can he go this way through us? But I think it's, are we creating a problem for people going that way? Mm-hmm. And maybe that's where some of these dress codes and things come from, where actually people who had, you know, they were like, we don't want to hinder people being able to see God. So then they created something that, so I don't necessarily know why everybody would do certain things about having certain rules about certain looks, but for my struggle, like I feel like I've had the most freedom that I've ever had. But that doesn't mean that I'm not, you know, as I'm getting ready to come to work every day, I'm not thinking about, you know, am I going to be in the way if I wear this?
Yeah.
It's complicated. Like if I come to, you know, there's days where we do work around the church and we're going to paint and we're going to do stuff like that. And my brain will be like, dude, don't wear that, you know, shirt that's got paint all over it. That's for painting. You know, if somebody comes in and they're like, they want to talk to the pastor, you're going to look terrible. You know, there's stuff like that goes through your brain. But then you have to just trust that people understand that, you know, they're going to walk in on you painting. Right. So they would understand that you were painting. That means you should have clothes on that aren't going to get wrecked. Right. So there's some trust that I think has to be there. But yeah, that we're ranging. We are, and that's good. So let's wander back. I'll say one thing about clothes before we, it's interesting because I know if you just think about it in the context of church, you don't realize some of this, I don't think. But like back in the day when if you made a rep hockey team, you showed up in a shirt and tie. Mm-hmm. And I know there's still some teams that do that, but most of it's gone. And so it's been intriguing to me when I think about church and I think about my experience of it. Like church was that day where no, you knew something was different because you had to dress in a different way. You had to prepare a bit more. And I wonder, I don't want to go back to dress codes. Don't hear me wrong on this, but I think with every action and reaction, there's a consequence. And when I look at, you know, where even we are as a church, and I look at my own family, you go, okay, but did we lose a little something by that? You know Do you think the call to a higher humanity when they were like, you young pups need to dress up and look good when you come to the arena, because hockey culture was really, really not the healthiest in some of those environments where it was just kind of like, and so they wanted someone to like, you need to really look good. You need to like, we want you to set a standard of how you look and how you act because the nice clothes are tied together to a better behavior.
Yeah, like I think so. I think there's like, a lot of it. I think there's also the privilege, like you get to play on this team, like you're representing us. So when you show up, you represent good, well.
Right? Yeah.
But also like, I think there's just a prep thing. Like I think, and this has, been my own experience. Not everybody works at a church and not everybody can do this because their wife would hate them, but this happens to be my job so I can pull it off. I love church way more because I'm prepared every Sunday. I come here a couple hours before and I prepare myself, whereas in our culture in itself, for the most part, people are scrambling to get here on time, rushing to get in. And I think there's a little something that, and again, I don't know what everybody else's upbringing was. My upbringing, my parents were awesome that way. We did dress up, but it's not like I felt like church was a horrible thing or anything. It wasn't it was just, no, on this day, you dress up because you're going to do something. You're going to go. And I don't know if it was ever explained to me that, we're doing this in honor of God. I don't know about any of those things. And maybe it was just a respect thing that, hey, look, you're entering into a special building. And I get the downsides. If you walk into a building, everybody has shirt and tie and you don't, you feel odd. I know all of that. I just think that little piece of preparation that if we're not going to do it with the clothes, is there something that we need to be doing better that helps us to get ready for that reset that you have, right? Because church very much is a reset on your week. Is there something that we threw out the dressing up, we threw out that stuff, but then didn't replace it with anything? And I just wonder if there's that's the one thing that sometimes when I'm thinking about my kids and I'm thinking about them coming to church and I'm like, how do you help them learn better? Because we do this with school. I do this with baseball clinics. I do this all other stuff. You're like, well, how do I help them absorb this material? If the goal on Sunday mornings is for them to get connected, if they're supposed to have moments of worship, if they're supposed to learn, am I doing my job as a parent preparing my child to enter into that space? And that's the only thing when I think of shirt and tie, for me, that's always an experience that is not a negative. I liked the way I looked. I liked dressing up a little bit and you'd show up in church and you know what I mean? Like, I think so for me, I don't have the same viewpoint as you did on that. And it could just be the age because I was always in church. That's why it's always a little bit intriguing because I never felt any of that. I just thought it was kind of neat. And then the older you get, you're like, I get it. If you never wear a shirt and tie and you show up and everybody looks like that, you're kind of like, yeah, what are we doing here? But anyways, back to unforgiveness. And maybe it's more of a culture question, but how do we move back to a place where forgiveness is the norm? And I want to be clear, like there are specific circumstances that people are going to assume we're talking about, and there just isn't. I'm talking about my relationship as coworkers, with people that I coach with. But yeah, then you're also talking about my relationship with my parents, with my spouse, with my kids. Like this is in general, and like I said before, like there's also the generalized unforgiveness that we hold over people of, and it's not just nationality or culture, but there's just, if you've experienced certain something, you're going to then, if you choose not to forgive, you're going to hold a generalized resentment. Right? Like when we open Family Central, I'll give you an example. One of the things that we continue to face is people saying, I don't want those people in our town. What do you mean by those people? Now, people can take that as a very negative, and it is. It's kind of a rude thing to say. But if you've had a child who was introduced to drugs by somebody else and it destroyed their life, you're going to see that different than somebody who hasn't. Right? If you had a spouse who got onto drugs, if you had whatever that thing is, like, and so there's individual stories there. And it impacts us so incredibly much. How do then we as a church, and I think of us as pastoral staff, I think of our elders, how do you create a culture where bitterness would be kind of like, oh, really? Instead of it being, yeah, I get it. And I think the I get it is good, but Jesus never leaves it there. Jesus is never like, no, I get it. I mean, they hurt me too. He's sitting on the cross, he's hanging near his death and going, hey, God, can you please forgive them? Because they clearly don't know what they're doing. How does that become the norm instead of it becoming the, abnormal?
Well, my first response is I'm pretty sure you hold the title of teaching pastor in the church. So
Yeah, you're executive pastor. You're my boss.
Oh, no.
No, I'm not saying there's an easy answer, but would you disagree with me? I feel like that's in modern Christianity, in our general experience. Again, I want to go a little bit general here. I'm not saying just Mount Salem Community Church. In our general experience, people being and holding on to bitterness in their marriages and their relationships has been more accepted than I feel like Scripture allows.
Yeah, I would probably say it's a rare thing for a woman who is upset at her husband and is holding bitterness about something to have another woman walk up to her and say, you need to get that right because that's not good. I don't hear a lot of stories of that happening.
No.
In today's modern context, it's like a man would have a pat on the back by his buddy and be like, yeah, it's okay for you to feel that way about your partner. Let's go grab a drink and we'll hang out and talk about how bad our spouses are together, right, rather than, saying, dude, that's a terrible thing. You can't be thinking and feeling that way. Like, what are you doing?
Right. My brain was racing about this, and I wondered if
I feel like in our context, like I can only speak within a Canadian North American context. We have a lot. And if I want to hold on to my hatred and still look the part, I can spend my way to that. Like I can. And I think that has a lot to do with it. Mm-hmm. I can still have lots of friends around me who aren't going to call me out because they want to go, snowmobiling with me, because they want to, the idols that are around us have more value than the Jesus who saved us. And I think that has a lot to do with it. And that might come across harsh, but I don't think it is. I think we don't want to call our buddy out because we don't want to lose our friend. Instead of...
And let's be honest, we don't want to get called out.
Right.
Right. We've kind of created a culture of if you leave my sin alone, I'll leave your sin alone.
Right. And let's go play together.
Yeah.
We're going to go to our playground.
Do you think one other thing...
So is that just a lack of maturity within our context, and we've been allowed ourselves to become immature little kids running around on our playgrounds without actually resolving anything?
I think part of it. I was wondering too, though, like, because church or culture has impacted the church drastically. And when I look at, the mental health movement, which is in an interesting way, we've never been more unhealthy mentally than we are right now, which is wild to me to think with how many resources we have. Like the stats are incredible. But when we looked at it, we went, okay, so I don't know, let's say 40 years ago, if you were in the church, you'd be told to suck it up, get over it, move on. And it was way too far on the one side, where there was no compassion for an abusive spouse. There was no compassion. Sorry, if you were being abused by a spouse, there was no compassion, like any of that stuff. It was just, no, this is it. And as culture kind of went, no, like we need to have empathy and we need to have compassion for this. I feel like the church has overcorrected as well and been like, no, I want to hear your pain. But then instead of ending that with saying, the go and sin no more, which Jesus did, we end it with, no, I get it. And then we just kind of want to leave it there because we don't want to go back to that. We don't want to be that stern, abusive, spiritually abusive church that forces people to do things. And I just feel like a lot of this is subtle. Like when I look at where we've come, it's just a subtle little slow change. And all of a sudden one day you wake up and you're like, how are we all allowing so much bitterness? And like you listen to some of the conversations and you're like, wow, like how am I feeling this? How am I doing this? How has this become normalized? And so I think, honestly, it has to start with us even acknowledging that exists. Right? And I think that's, the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit. I think there's a piece of kind of recognizing, man, there's a lot of brokenness in me. And as soon as I miss that, none of this conversation matters because you'll just get defensive. So I have a right to, you probably do have a right. I'm not saying nobody has a right to be better. There's lots of people that do. There's people that have tons of right. I just know what Jesus has told us to do with it. And so I think there's a cultural piece there too. I think that the inability to know how to reconcile is also a challenge there.
Yeah.
But then you look at, there's something, and I wish I knew how Erwin said it, so I'll just not even try to fully quote him, but he talked about the armor of God being basic character. And so basically the way you're going to defend yourself as a Christian is in the character by which you respond to these situations.
Mm-hmm.
So then when you get hurt, the sword of the Spirit is not to destroy the other, or the helmet of righteousness and all these things. They're literally to, how do I have the character that outside of the armor of God I'd never be able to have?
Right.
I would never be able to forgive this person ever outside of the armor of God. And so, I mean, you've touched on that too, like that we don't, it's something that we can't do on our own.
Mm-hmm.
But I also don't think if we're not at war, if we're not, going to a place of, I got to put my armor on, then we shouldn't be surprised that we've ended up where we are. Because we've just kind of accepted it. Well, this is the broken nature that we're in. This is the broken state that we're in.
Yeah. That's a big question. I feel like maybe we've gotten accustomed to really being wounded and walking around with those wounds. And everybody's just okay with a bunch of hurt people. Yeah. I don't know. I got a bunch of imagery going on my head about really well-dressed people that all are wearing casts and, they're on crutches, but they're really well-dressed and they're, and there's no, yeah. I think this is a topic that the church really needs to dive deep into. Yeah, I think whenever we get to stuff like this, the me factor is always at play. And I think it's very difficult I say difficult. I think my pride plays a big role in my desire not to forgive.
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, I'm going to say something like, you hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
And me is the I. It's, and I think, at the core, at the root of it, there's a pride that says, you shouldn't have done that to me. And I'm not going to let you go, even though you probably have the exact same pain that you're walking around with. Yeah, I think we're asking people, or Jesus is asking people, or calling people out to a higher, a better value of living, and it's one that we can easily allow because, as we've talked about, you can look really good and still be really, 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 really bitter and unforgiving towards somebody.
Right.
Yeah, and then I think back to our conversation that we started this with about peace in the Middle East, and I'm like, the layers of hurt that are there, like layers of hurt that drive parents to teach their kids that the best thing they could do is to shoot someone on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a profound level of hatred.
Right.
I don't know if I can understand where they are because I'm not there. I can only imagine. But man, there are seeds of that I have felt inside of me that I can say, I can get how it gets there. I can see how you were driven by your. That's the crazy thing about unforgiveness and bitterness is it can drive you,
right.
like control you. It can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I look at that. Yeah, I really wish that they could find peace. Like
Yeah. I think, and we'll kind of wrap up with this, and I don't know if we need to carry on next week or dive into some of the other stuff, but something that I think Will said years ago, and you just talked about. I know this is general. This is what Will was the one who I think shared it in a message that kind of stood out to me. But cultures are built around family, and when family falls apart, culture falls apart. And so then, as you think about the last couple of years, you think about all the different things that we're fighting about. I mean, it's a big part of the whole sexuality conversation too, in marriage, and who gets to define marriage and all this stuff, and why does marriage matter? And so the older I get, the more I'm like, man, the reason marriage in so many ways and family defines culture is that's where you learn this actually. And I think that's been part of the problem, is that we have this platform on social media to condemn everybody else's unforgiveness. But then we've also created a culture where ours is accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Israel, no, there's only so much you get to fight back on this. And now that they've fought, now we'd go, okay, well, now Palestine, there's only so much you get to do to respond. And then you just keep fighting back and forth. Because everybody, you're trying to, and somebody's like, hey, you just need to forgive now. But I can't forgive my neighbor. I don't know how to forgive my wife. I don't know how to. And so when I think about creating that culture in the church, I'm like, man, how do you create that culture in your families? How do you create that culture in when people come into the church? The one thing they know is, my goodness, these people forgive each other. Because really, that's the root of everything. That's the whole gospel message, is this crazy grace. That wasn't just like, I choose to forgive you. It was, I will also take the consequence on your behalf of the sin that you committed. And so then when I look at that, and I look at that in my marriage, and I'm like, oh man, I've fallen so far short. Goodness.
Is it the pinnacle marker of a follower of Jesus to actually practice forgiveness and grace? Like, because it's one of the hardest things. Like I last week, I put a question on the whiteboard for my grade 6, 7, 8 students for junior youth. And the question, what's the hardest thing you've ever had to do?
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of them were like, when my parents sold my puppy dog, and
some of the general stuff.
One of the girls said, when I had to decide between my mom and my dad, who I was going to live with, whew. And then one of the volunteers said, when I actually took the time to forgive what people had done to me growing up. Like, the hardest thing he's ever had to do was forgive. Like, I just don't know how that's possible outside of God working through you to do that. Like, it is like, I think there's a reason why God says vengeance is his.
Yeah.
Like, it's not yours.
Right.
Don't take vengeance to be yours. Let it be God's. Because we create havoc when we apply vengeance.
Well, and
it's
the question's a good question. I struggle with saying it's the pinnacle, but I also go, I don't know how anything Christian can stay outside of forgiveness.
Well, how do you love your neighbor if you can't forgive?
Wow,
when you
look at the church gathering on a Sunday morning, it's not a group of people who see a lot in common.
No.
Like, it's a really diverse little group of people who their only thing is Jesus. And then you go, okay, well, in an average church, you're 150, 200 people. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when somebody offends somebody. Right? All the other stuff, it's hard. It's hard to, be patient, be this, be that. But failure is going to come. And when it comes, if you choose not to forgive, we're done. Like there's no other thing of saying, well, I'm not going to forgive, but we can still be buddies. Like it just doesn't work that way. And so I would argue it probably is. Like I think it's for sure the defining marker.
I just don't know how you can build love with another broken human being if you can't forgive them.
I would argue strongly that it is the difference between marriages that succeed and marriages that don't is our ability and willingness to learn to forgive. Now, given there's always unique circumstances and those are unique, but in general, it started with a small little seed.
I think we wrap up with this thought. What came to my mind as we've been talking, and that's the crazy thing about having a brain that's ADHD. As we're talking, there's all sorts of secondary things that are really developing in the brain as we're going along. And the thought I had is, the other day we were driving around in the van, and my two boys were in the back, and they started arguing about something, and they were starting to go at it. And then I very sternly reminded them that I had the biggest stick in the van. And then if they didn't calm down, I was going to help them calm down. And that they needed to stop arguing, right? Like, and I think right now this peace agreement is just basically the nation with the biggest stick has said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get you guys to stop going at it. So here's a little something for you. Here's a little something for you. And if you don't want to follow along, the stick's going to drop on you. And I think right now that's the type of peace they have. It's not the type of peace where there's wholeness and repair. You can see some seeds of that by having hostages returned, and that brings wholeness back to, and that's, I'm really cheapening the word because I get the fact that you just lost 2 years with a partner, a spouse, a child, a son, and you know, I get all that, but that's the only kind of return to completeness that is happening in this peace process right now. I think the hard work of peace is, now that we're done shooting each other, how do we restore?
Right.
Because when I look at Gaza and the buildings,
I think it's insane.
Like, I just think about my boys being in one of those buildings, and I'm like, man, like I feel like you should walk in there and you should be like rebuilding every single building. And like you should be handing the keys to a brand new place to a family and saying, I hope you can grow your family in this. Like, how do you actually make peace when it seems like there is no peace? Right. And I think that's the work that needs to be done, no matter how crazy that might seem to but.
Yeah. So anyways, it's been quite the conversation. Whether you disagree, agree, love it, hate it, I hope it inspires some thoughts. Our goal with these is we're not polished.
No, we're just talking.
We are talking. We're very authentic that way, in the sense of this is just who we are, and this is some of the struggle we're facing. I don't know the answers to all these questions. We're certainly trying to figure it out. And beyond that, hope your week goes well. We'll talk on the next one.
Yeah.